Um, so first, the Signals Club itself was a conversation. Jake and I were talking about something else, and he said if I have questions about our organization, he'd be happy to answer them. And I said, if you were in my position, and he knows a little bit about our organization and where we were with foresight and futures thinking, what's the one thing you would do, and what feedback do you have for me on doing it? He said he would start a Signals Club, and the feedback he had was don't just do it at your executive level, do it through the entire organization. That was really good feedback, because probably if he had said that, my first thought would have been bring it to the executive level and it'll trickle down at the organization. And so starting out initially with the entire organization, I think was really helpful. And once he said that to me, what I really wanted in the club, I started a couple of other clubs in the past, and what's been really successful for me is for it to be very inclusive, very accessible for everybody in the organization, both so that people feel like they can start regardless of their experience, but also, when you have any type of organization with turnover, if you have somebody new come in as an employee or new come into the club, I wanted them to feel really welcome and not like an outsider. And so that was something I thought a lot about. How can I make this accessible and then also feel like they're part of it immediately from the first meeting they attend? And to do that, we decided to do both in-person and virtual meetings. And then the thing I've been working on through the first year of all of our meetings, we've been doing Signals Club meetings for a year, is this 3-minute intro. That was kind of a thing I really wanted, was for people that are coming back to a meeting, if they've come every time or if they haven't been for a couple, could have a refresher on what signals are. And then especially new people, help them get oriented very quickly at the beginning of the session so that they feel like they can participate and don't have to sit back and let the more seasoned people talk while they listen. I want them to be able to immediately start talking and feel like their perspective is welcome. So in the 3-minute intro, first thing I do is I talk about what is a signal just from a technical standpoint. I think people like to feel like, here's what the definition is. And then I tell them, when I first started learning about signals, I had a really hard time finding them until I finally realized the things that I was dismissing were signals. The things that I would say, oh, that's dumb, that'll never be anything, that was a signal. And people really have connected with that and felt like, oh, I do that all the time. And they understand that they're doing it, and then they can start to find signals very quickly that way, just by identifying that. And when I first advertised for the Signals Club, I decided to use music as kind of a theme, because I felt like it was really accessible, everybody can relate to music, and it was not controversial at all. So I did kind of a timeline. You can see it over on the left. It's hard to read all the details, but basically I did a timeline of MP3s and where that kind of started in the 70s, and some of the change into MP3s and then streaming, and then talked about how in the 70s and 80s and even early 90s, here are some signals of change coming to music. And so I use that same example for every intro, because all of our employees have seen this if they have signed up for Signals Club. So it kind of keeps that thread running through, and it doesn't take very much to get them on the same page. And I basically tell them, hey, I know we're in Kansas. I know we're very friendly people. We don't like to contradict each other. We don't like to, sometimes we'll hold back having a bold opinion because we feel like it might be controversial. And I encourage them to bring those contradictory and controversial opinions to the table and think of it as making the conversation more interesting, more complex, more nuanced. And I always tell them, okay, so maybe in the early 2000s, somebody would have said streaming is the future of music. Well, it's part of the future of music, but that doesn't mean that everybody stopped listening to records, or people don't still have CDs, people don't still use MP3s. And if we only talk about streaming, you're not getting really what the present music industry looks like. So if you're going to talk about the future of something, you don't want to just talk about streaming. You want to talk about MP3s and records and all of the other things that feel like they contradict each other, because people are at once using many of those or maybe one of those. And some people have never streamed music at all. And that's really opened people up more to say, hey, I hear what you're saying, but how could there be a world where this thing that contradicts that exists at the same time? And that's been really helpful. I don't know if you're not in the Midwest in the US, maybe that isn't something you have to overcome, but we really, really had to overcome that because people felt like they were arguing with each other and they didn't want to be that way. And then I talk a little bit about bias, and I go back again to how I was dismissing ideas, and that was my bias, trying to take a shortcut. And I had to really slow down and say, all right, what is this bias and how can I overcome it? And if I'm really struggling with it, I just tell myself, okay, I'm going to suspend reality. And I'm going to say, I don't know if I really think this is going to happen, but what if it did? And I tell them the only thing they can't do in this meeting is say that will never happen. And you have to either not speak or say, what if that did? And then you can talk about it. And I always tell them to be creative, be bold, be imaginative. You can imagine in banking, we don't get a lot of that. So this is an opportunity to just let all of the more numbers-based things go and just be creative and think about the future in a bold and imaginative way. And I talked a little bit about wanting to have both in-person and virtual. So I'm going to show you, people always want to see how we conduct those meetings. For in-person, we have an actual physical handout, which feels anti-futures, but the room that we're in on a screen really wasn't going to work. And we found that people wanted something tangible that they could look at and they could read along with. Different people learn and absorb different ways. And so having this, not everybody uses them, but those that want them like to really look at the handout and they like to see the sources, and that helps them kind of orient in what they're getting ready to talk about. And so you can see I have 6 signals on here. Usually we get through about 5. We have a 10-minute limit on talking about a signal. Another thing for feedback that we got was people didn't want to linger too long on one signal because they feel like they're missing out on the rest of the signals. So we try to have at least 6. We usually get through 5, sometimes 4. And I have the title of the signal and then the what on the handout here. And then for the virtual one, we do PowerPoint slides. And this is the final iteration of the slide, but when we present it, when we talk about the signal, we have the title and we have the what. And then as we go into the so what, then we'll display the so what and start the conversation. Then we pull the slide down, talk about the signal, and then as we're finishing up, we pull the slide back up and display the now what. And the now what is something we do for both in-person and virtual. This was more feedback we got. Our employees, interestingly, mostly aren't managers, but they really were not into the idea of what many people call like executive entertainment. They just weren't into that. They didn't like the feel of not having something tangible to take away. Even if I tried to tell them the takeaway is the way you're thinking differently, they still wanted something very, I want to take this back and tell my manager this is what I learned, and thinking differently doesn't feel like a thing to them. Even though they're getting it, they don't feel it. So we added in now what. And you have to remember, this is all staff, so they don't have the power to make big changes, but they do have the power to come in with their new thinking into department meetings, into staff meetings, if they're on a project team, into project meetings, if they're talking about processes that they want to change or eliminate or create new products and services. These employees are all in those types of meetings, whether it's, if they're in a branch and improving a process for how our members are interacting with them, all the way up to, hey, I'm on a project team or on this big project or this big initiative. They wanted this now what. So we put in a now what that says, bring this. This is something about the workplace. We talked about bringing it into if you're hiring new employees or restructuring your department or having issues with retention. These are the ways that you can approach. You don't say, hey, Chick-fil-A did this. You talk about the reasons that Chick-fil-A made changes to how they were able to recruit and retain employees, and how can we bring that into something today, and what are the values that are coming from this signal. People really like that, and I think that has made a lot of people come back because they want to challenge the ways that they're coming to the table. A lot of these employees are really trying to impress because they're not in the management roles yet. They want to build their skill set so that they can eventually get into those roles. I'm going to go back one. You can see up here, this is not something that you have to do. This is something that I added in. Fast Futures training, I'd give 1 training away for every meeting we're in. We do a drawing. They can throw their name into the hat if they want to. For me, at $99 every other month, super easy to add into my budget. And these, I'm not doing it to get employees into Signals Club. I don't think this is what's drawing people in. However, for those that are really enjoying futures thinking and foresight, this super easy, super accessible, 90 minutes, affordable way to expand their thought process. And we've had, I think, 3 or 4 employees go through these training, and the feedback that I get is it's well worth it. So if you have a way to incent them to keep coming into growing the skill set, I think that's really important, because at some point it feels like, okay, I'm going to all these meetings, what's coming out of it? And I want to give them a little bit more to grow on. So we are using that. The one thing I'm struggling with is getting people to bring their own signals. Right now, I and then 2 people that I have on a futures committee bring all the signals. This last meeting, I said, if you bring a signal, I'll buy you anything you want out of the vending machines. And it's as silly as that, but one guy right after the meeting said, I'll bring a signal. And I'm like, I'll buy you 2 things out of the vending machine then. And so he has a signal now that he wants to bring to the next meeting. So I think that's the next step for us, is really getting people, it feels very vulnerable, to bring the signals. I think if you can front load them for a while to get them thinking about it, then try to find a way to incent people to bring the first couple, I think then more people will bring them. Next thing is supplemental. I don't want to talk too much about this, but these are a couple of things that I've created more for the executive team. So the first thing that I do is, I call it Feature Friday. I take 6 to 8 signals. I give them a what and a so what for each signal. And then I write a short scenario. It's a little bit longer than what you can see on the screen, but it's a pretty short scenario. And I do the backcasting inside of the story. The intent with this is discussion starters. So at the bottom of the scenario, I have a topic expansion and discussion starters. I know my boss is kind enough to include this in our staff meeting for discussion starting. We've used it. It's been very fun. Even though I've written the scenario, I've gotten way more out of it by discussing with the team. And then there are a couple of other departments that say their teams have really enjoyed just talking about the scenario. It's like this little short story they can read and then talk about it. And then the last thing I have is an opportunity that I'm giving to any employees that have attended at least 2 Signals Club meetings. We're going to get together and use a couple of design futures tools to build a future world and then build an artifact from the future. This is something I have never done, but I'm just going to dive in head first and see what we come out with. And I'll talk about that more in the participatory futures section in a second. But this is just an opportunity, again, for those that are really excited and interested in it. I want to give them something else. I want to give them a little bit more, because for me, I think futures thinking really took off when I took the design futures course. And that's not a plug for the course necessarily, although it is a plug for the course. But I think it just takes the certain thing for you to be like, oh my gosh, I really understand this now. This is really exciting and fun for me. So for those employees that want to get on the more creative side of things, this is going to give them a little bit more to chew on.